With these renderings, we can finally begin phase 1 of the Marina.
These renderings are fake, and everyone in this room knows it.
Don't be ridiculous.
Look at the maps. The intake line connects here. The elevation is wrong. They cut the corners on the spillway. I understand your concerns, but we need to see the data.
The dam is structurally sound. The plans confirm it. Just tell me what's happening.
What is this?
Everything you need to know. Look at it.
I found them. Every lie they told is in here. They knew about this the whole time.
Character A, we have a search warrant for these documents.
You can't just barge in here.
I'm afraid we can, sir.
You don't own this water anymore. That was the first thing Victoria Hargrove said to me the morning I found out the HOA had built a $3 million marina on my private lake. Not asked, not proposed, built. And the worst part? Half the neighborhood was standing behind her holding champagne glasses like they were celebrating the opening of some luxury resort instead of trespassing on land my family had owned since 1971. If you've ever dealt with one of these HOA people who think a clipboard and a smile make them royalty, comment below with your city. I want to know where people are watching from because what happened out here in Western Tennessee still doesn't feel real to me. The fog that morning sat low over the water so thick you could barely see the fishing docks from my cabin porch. Cold lake wind pushed through the cedar trees behind the house, while rainwater dripped off the metal roof in slow, steady taps. I'd been awake since 4:30 because somebody down near the shoreline kept backing pickup trucks down the gravel path beside the marina site. At first, I thought maybe county crews were checking storm drainage after the overnight thunderstorm. Then I saw the lights. Portable floodlights reflecting across the water like a prison yard. I grabbed my thermos, walked down toward the dock, and stopped dead halfway there. They'd installed a full floating marina overnight. Fresh cedar planks, stainless steel cleats, private slips, even decorative lantern posts wired into temporary generators humming along the shoreline mud. And right in the middle of it all was Victoria Hargrove wearing a cream-colored trench coat, like she was cutting a ribbon at a country club. "Morning, Daniel," she called out without even turning around fully. Beautiful day for progress. Two security guys in HOA jackets stepped between me and my own dock. One of them held his hand up like I was some drunk stranger wandering onto restricted property. I remember hearing the water slap against the new pontoons while everybody behind Victoria kept talking and laughing like this was normal. Like I was the problem for interrupting their little celebration. "Move," I told the guard calmly. "That's my dock." Victoria finally turned toward me then, smiling the same way bank managers smile before denying a loan. Polite. Practiced. Empty. "Actually," she said, adjusting the leather gloves on her wrist, "the community voted to reclaim lake access last month." I stared at her for a second because I honestly thought she was joking. "This lake isn't HOA property." "Well," she replied softly, glancing back toward the crowd behind her. "According to county development records, that's still under review." The people around her shifted uncomfortably, but nobody said anything. That's the thing about these neighborhoods. Most people don't want to be right. They want to stay comfortable. A couple standing near the champagne table avoided eye contact with me completely. Somebody else started recording on their phone. Victoria noticed it too. She liked having an audience. "You should have signed the shared access agreement when we offered," she continued. "Now things have moved beyond your control." That line stayed with me. Beyond your control. Because standing there in the cold fog watching HOA flags flap over my shoreline, even I started wondering how far this thing had already gone without me knowing. Then I noticed something sticking out of the mud beside the nearest dock post. A fresh county survey marker hammered into the ground less than 6 feet from my grandfather's old fishing bench. By 9 that morning, the fog had burned off just enough for the whole shoreline to see what Victoria had done to my lake. Pickup trucks lined both sides of the gravel road leading down from the subdivision clubhouse, and residents kept drifting toward the marina carrying folding chairs and coffee cups like it was some kind of parade. Every few minutes, somebody glanced over at my cabin, then looked away fast when they realized I was standing there watching. That was the part that got under my skin more than the marina itself. People knew this land belonged to my family. They had fished off my grandfather's dock for years. Their kids learned to cast lines off that shoreline. But now that the HOA had put up polished signs and floating lanterns, suddenly everybody acted confused about who owned what. I drove into town around 10 because I needed answers before Victoria buried this thing any deeper. Rain started again halfway there, light at first, then harder once I crossed the county line. The courthouse square looked gray and empty under the storm clouds, water running along the curbs while old American flags snapped in the wind outside the municipal building. Inside the county records office, everything smelled like wet paper and burnt coffee. A woman behind the counter recognized my last name immediately. That alone told me something was wrong. "You hear about the Marina mess?" she asked quietly. I told her I wanted copies of every filing connected to my property over the last 6 months. She hesitated before turning her monitor slightly away from the lobby windows. "You did not hear this from me," she said, lowering her voice. "But your HOA president has been in here almost every week." That hit harder than I expected. Victoria had not just crossed a line overnight. She had been planning this for months while smiling in my face at neighborhood cookouts and board meetings. 30 minutes later, I was sitting alone in the diner across from the courthouse flipping through county filings while thunder rolled somewhere over the hills west of town. The waitress kept topping off my coffee without asking because she could probably see the look on my face. Most of the paperwork was zoning language and development requests, but one page stopped me cold. The HOA had already secured financing, $3 million through a regional development lender out of Nashville. The marina was collateralized against future property value increases inside the subdivision. In plain English, if this thing failed, the entire neighborhood could end up paying for it. I leaned back in the booth staring through the rain-streaked diner window while my stomach tightened. This was bigger than some petty HOA power trip now. Victoria had gambled everybody's homes on a lake she did not even legally own. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it until the second message came through. "You need to check the Western Shoreline Survey maps before tonight's board meeting." No name. No explanation. Just that. A minute later, another text arrived with a blurry photo attached. It showed one of the new county survey stakes from my property line, except somebody had moved it nearly 40 feet inland. The HOA board meeting started at 6:30 sharp, and by 6:15 the parking lot outside the clubhouse was already full. Rainwater pooled along the cracked asphalt, while headlights cut through the fog rolling off the lake behind the building. I sat in my truck for a minute listening to the rain hit the windshield and thinking about my father. He used to say small towns never really hide corruption. They just dress it up in politeness long enough for people to stop asking questions. Inside, the room smelled like burnt coffee and wet jackets. Residents packed every folding chair, whispering in clusters the second I walked in. Some looked nervous. Others would not look at me at all. Victoria stood near the front projector screen greeting people with both hands wrapped around a white ceramic mug like she was hosting a church fundraiser instead of a hostile land grab. The second she saw me, her smile tightened just slightly around the eyes. That was new. "Daniel," she said warmly enough for the room to hear. "I am glad you decided to join us tonight." There it was again. That polished little performance she used whenever she wanted the crowd on her side before cutting somebody apart. I took a seat near the back wall beside old Frank Delaney, one of the original homeowners from the early subdivision years. He leaned closer without looking at me directly. "People are getting nervous," he muttered. "Word about the financing started spreading this afternoon." I kept my eyes on Victoria. "How did they find out?" Frank gave a dry little laugh. "You think secrets survive 5 minutes in this county?" The meeting opened with applause after Victoria unveiled new renderings of the marina expansion. Bigger boat slips, wedding lighting packages, kayak rentals. Somebody in the crowd actually clapped when she mentioned projected property value increases. Then she shifted tone smoothly and put my property map on the screen behind her. Except it was wrong. The western shoreline boundary had been moved nearly 40 feet inland, exactly like the photo from the anonymous text message. A few residents turned toward me immediately. I could feel the room changing. Victoria folded her hands calmly. "As many of you know," she said, "certain outdated family claims have delayed progress on the lake revitalization project." Outdated family claims. Hearing my grandfather's land described like some expired coupon almost made me lose my temper right there. But anger was exactly what she wanted. "You moved the survey markers," I said evenly. Her expression never changed. The county updated the shoreline assessment. No, I replied. Somebody physically moved the stakes. Silence hit the room hard after that. You could hear rain hammering the clubhouse roof and the faint whine of boat generators down at the marina. Victoria smiled again, but slower this time. Daniel, she said softly, I understand emotions are running high. That smug tone finally cracked something loose in the crowd because a woman near the front suddenly raised her hand and asked whether homeowners were financially liable if the marina permits failed. Victoria's eyes flicked toward the board members so fast I almost missed it. Tiny movement. Tiny panic. Then another resident asked why the HOA had never disclosed the loan amount publicly. More whispers. More shifting chairs. The room was starting to tilt away from her. That was when a contractor in a mud-stained rain jacket stood up near the exit and said the words that changed everything. She told us Daniel Mercer sold the lake access rights years ago. Every head in the room turned toward Victoria at once. The room stayed dead quiet for almost 3 full seconds after the contractor spoke. You could hear rainwater rattling through the clubhouse gutters outside and the low electrical hum from the projector behind Victoria. She did not answer immediately either, which told me more than anything she could have said. Victoria Hargrove always had an answer ready, always polished, always controlled. But now people were staring at her instead of me. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she looked cornered. There seems to be some confusion, she said finally, smoothing one hand across the front of her blazer. Her voice still sounded calm, but tighter now, thinner around the edges. The board acted based on documentation we believed to be accurate at the time. That word hit the room hard. Believed. Not verified. Not confirmed. Believed. Frank Delaney leaned back beside me and muttered under his breath. That is lawyer language. Another homeowner stood up near the sidewall. Retired schoolteacher named Linda Carver. She had defended Victoria at nearly every HOA meeting for years. You told us the lake easement had already been settled, she said carefully. Victoria gave her a patient smile that looked almost painful to maintain. Linda, these development matters can become complicated. Complicated enough to bankrupt the neighborhood? Somebody else snapped from the back. The room started turning fast after that. Not screaming. Not chaos. Worse. Quiet panic. People whispering to spouses. Phones coming out under tables. Residents pulling up mortgage apps and HOA bylaws while thunder rolled over the lake outside like distant artillery. Victoria tried regaining control by shifting attention back toward me. Daniel has always resisted modernization efforts, she said. This community has struggled for years with underutilized waterfront access. Underutilized? I almost laughed hearing my grandfather's lake described like vacant retail space. You built commercial docks on private shoreline, I replied calmly, without verified ownership. She folded her arms slowly. The county did not object. Yet, that single word landed harder than I intended because several people turned toward the board members immediately. One of them, Greg Walters, suddenly looked sick. He loosened his collar and stared down at the floor while rain hammered against the clubhouse windows. That was when I noticed Victoria glance toward him. Tiny movement again. Tiny fear. They both knew something the rest of the room did not. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another unknown number. This time it was a scan document. Old engineering diagrams dated 1974. Reservoir control schematics. I stared at the page while my pulse slowed instead of rising. The western spillway was highlighted in red ink beside my father's signature. Below it was one sentence typed across the bottom margin. Primary Water Control Authority retained exclusively by Mercer Land Trust. I felt something shift inside me right then. Up until that moment I had been reacting, defending, trying to stop damage already done. But sitting there listening to residents panic while Victoria struggled to hold on to the room, I realized she had never actually understood what she built this marina on top of. The lake was not just private property. It was controlled water infrastructure. And judging by the sudden look on Greg Walters' face when he noticed the document in my hand, somebody on that board had just realized it too. Victoria followed his eyes toward me. Her smile disappeared completely for the first time. Victoria ended the meeting 20 minutes early, but nobody really left when she said it was over. People stayed clustered around the folding tables whispering while rain pounded the parking lot outside hard enough to blur the windows. I stood near the back wall watching board members avoid eye contact with residents who suddenly had a lot more questions than they did an hour earlier. The contractor who exposed Victoria slipped out before anybody could corner him, but the damage was already done. The room no longer felt like an HOA meeting. It felt like the first hour after a bank collapse when nobody knows how much money is actually gone yet. Victoria moved through the crowd carefully, touching shoulders, lowering her voice, trying to calm people one at a time. There is no financial danger to homeowners, she kept repeating. The internet is creating confusion. But every time she said it, somebody else pulled up another loan document or permit screenshot on their phone. Fear spreads fast in wealthy neighborhoods because people start calculating property values before they process emotions. By the time I stepped outside, 3 residents were already arguing beside the rain-soaked flower beds about whether they should contact private attorneys. The cold air hit hard after the overheated clubhouse. Fog drifted low across the marina, lights down by the shoreline, and muddy runoff flowed through the gravel parking lot toward the lake. My truck was parked beside Greg Walters' black SUV. He was sitting inside alone, gripping the steering wheel with both hands like he had forgotten how to let go of it. I almost kept walking until he rolled down the passenger window. "Daniel," he said quietly, "just give me 5 minutes." His voice sounded exhausted, older than it had an hour ago. I stood there in the rain while he stared out toward the water. "Victoria told the board your family only retained fishing rights," he admitted finally. "She said the reservoir infrastructure was transferred decades ago during county redevelopment." "And you believed her?" He swallowed hard. "She brought documents." That part caught my attention immediately. "What documents?" Greg looked toward the clubhouse doors before answering. "Copies. Easement revisions. Survey overlays." She said the originals were archived in Nashville. Lightning flashed somewhere across the lake, briefly lighting up the marina through the fog like a ghost town floating over black water. Greg rubbed both hands over his face. "I think she forged them." Hearing somebody from the board say it out loud changed something in me emotionally. Until then, I had still been holding on to this stubborn hope that maybe Victoria had just pushed too far trying to impress the neighborhood. But forgery meant intent, planning, coordination. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Greg laughed bitterly. "Because this afternoon the lender called me directly." He finally looked up at me then. "Daniel, if ownership gets challenged officially, the bank can freeze the entire development loan immediately." Another piece clicked into place. That explained Victoria's panic. This was never just about prestige or lake access anymore. The marina itself was financially unstable. One serious legal challenge, and the whole structure holding this thing together could collapse overnight. Greg reached into his glove compartment and handed me a folded packet protected inside a plastic freezer bag. "I should have walked away weeks ago," he said quietly. Inside were internal HOA emails, budget projections, contractor disputes. Then one line highlighted in yellow stopped me cold. "Opening weekend must proceed before county environmental review is finalized." I stared at the sentence while thunder rolled low over the water again. They knew permits were still vulnerable, and they pushed construction anyway. I did not sleep that night. Rain kept rolling across the lake in long, heavy waves while marina floodlights glowed through the fog outside my cabin windows like a construction site that refused to die. Around 2 in the morning, I spread every document across my kitchen table beside my father's old survey maps, and finally stopped thinking like somebody under attack. Victoria wanted chaos. She wanted emotional reactions, neighborhood rumors, courtroom confusion. But the deeper I looked into the paperwork Greg gave me, the clearer the real weakness became. Liability. Not ownership alone. Liability. By sunrise, I was driving toward Nashville with a coffee thermos beside me and 3 banker boxes full of documents strapped into the passenger seat with a seatbelt like they were evidence in a murder trial. The interstate was almost empty except for freight trucks throwing mist into the cold morning air. I kept hearing Victoria's voice in my head from the dock. "Things have moved beyond your control." Somewhere around mile marker 140, I realized she had been wrong about that from the beginning. At 10:15, I walked into the regional office of the development lender financing the marina project. Quiet carpet, glass walls, expensive furniture designed to make ordinary people feel smaller than they are. A loan compliance officer named Richard Bell met me in a conference room overlooking the rain-soaked parking structure downtown. He looked skeptical right until I slid the reservoir control schematics across the table. Then his expression changed immediately. Your family retained operational authority over water levels, he asked, according to county engineering records dating back 50 years. He read in silence for almost a full minute while thunder rumbled faintly outside over the city skyline. Did the HOA disclose any of this during financing review? I asked calmly. Richard did not answer directly. That told me enough. Then I handed him the highlighted internal email Greg gave me regarding construction proceeding before environmental review completion. Richard leaned back slowly and removed his glasses. Mr. Mercer, he said carefully, if these documents are authentic, there are material disclosure issues attached to this loan. Material disclosure issues. Banker language for serious trouble. By the time I left Nashville that afternoon, the lender had already requested emergency clarification from the HOA board and suspended additional construction disbursements pending legal review. Victoria did not know that yet, but somebody inside the neighborhood must have sensed the shift because my phone started blowing up halfway home. Residents suddenly wanted meetings, explanations, reassurance. One homeowner texted asking if their insurance rates could increase if the marina permits failed. Another wanted to know whether environmental violations could trigger special assessments across the subdivision. Fear had evolved into self-preservation now. And once wealthy homeowners start protecting themselves financially, loyalty disappears fast. When I pulled back into the subdivision near dusk, the atmosphere felt completely different from 48 hours earlier. Nobody was celebrating anymore. The marina lights still reflected across the dark water, but the shoreline looked colder somehow, more exposed. Wet cedar planks creaked under lake wind, while workers quietly packed tools into pickup trucks without speaking much. Half the residents watching from their porches stopped waving at Victoria when she drove by in her white Range Rover. Then she saw my truck coming down the gravel road and stepped out into the rain before I even parked. What exactly did you do today? She asked. No smile this time. No polished warmth. Just controlled panic hidden beneath expensive makeup and exhaustion. I looked past her toward the floating marina stretching across my family's water. I asked the bank a few questions, I said quietly. For the first time since this started, Victoria looked genuinely afraid. By the next evening, the marina looked less like a luxury development and more like a crime scene nobody wanted to stand too close to. The weather had turned colder after the storm front pushed through, and thick fog drifted low over the water while damp wind rattled the temporary HOA banners tied along the shoreline railings. Workers were gone now. No music. No champagne tables. Just half-finished docks creaking against the lake current and extension cords snaking through wet mud beside abandoned toolboxes. I sat on my old fishing dock wrapped in my father's canvas jacket watching porch lights flicker on across the subdivision one by one. Every few minutes, somebody drove slowly past my gravel driveway, not stopping, just looking. The neighborhood gossip machine had fully turned against Victoria by then. Residents who used to praise her online were suddenly deleting comments and pretending they had concerns all along. One couple even removed the future Marina District sign from their front lawn before sunrise. Fear changes people fast, especially when banks start asking questions. Around 7, a black SUV from the lender rolled into the subdivision and parked outside the clubhouse. That alone sent residents gathering near windows and sidewalks like spectators waiting for a verdict. Nobody waved at Victoria anymore when she arrived 20 minutes later. That detail mattered more than she realized. In neighborhoods like this, social approval is power, and hers was evaporating in real time. She stepped out of her Range Rover wearing another expensive coat and carrying a leather folder pressed tightly against her chest, but the performance looked thinner now. Forced. Tired. A few residents actually turned away when she walked past them. Others stopped talking completely. Silence can humiliate somebody worse than yelling ever could. I stayed near the shoreline while fog rolled across the water between us. Victoria spotted me immediately and started walking over in those sharp, controlled steps she always used whenever she was angry, but trying not to show it publicly. You have created unnecessary panic in this community, she said before she even reached the dock. Her voice stayed low because people were watching from nearby porches. No, I answered calmly. The forged documents did that. Her jaw tightened instantly. You are making accusations you cannot prove. Then why did the lender send investigators? That landed hard. She glanced toward the clubhouse parking lot, where two men in suits were speaking with board members under the rain shelter. One of the board wives was crying quietly beside a pickup truck while another resident filmed the entire scene on his phone from across the street. Victoria lowered her voice further. Do you understand what happens if this project collapses now? There it was. Not concern for the neighborhood. Not apology. Liability fear. I looked out across the marina floating on my family's lake. Fog pressed against the lights so heavily the docks looked like they were slowly disappearing into darkness. You should have thought about that before building on water you did not control, I said. For a second, she looked like she wanted to argue again, but nobody came to stand beside her this time. Nobody defended her. Even Greg Walters stayed near the clubhouse entrance, avoiding eye contact completely. Victoria finally noticed it too. The isolation, the distance, the quiet judgment hanging over the entire shoreline. And for the first time since this started, she looked less like the president of the HOA and more like somebody standing alone in the middle of a very expensive mistake. The sheriff arrived just after 8 the next morning, while fog still covered most of the lake. I heard the tires crunch over the wet gravel driveway before I saw the vehicle itself. Dark county SUV. Mud splashed along the doors from the back roads around the reservoir. Two more vehicles followed behind it, one from County Environmental Services and another from the Lender's Compliance Division. By then, half the neighborhood was already awake and watching through kitchen windows with coffee mugs in their hands. Nobody even pretended this was normal anymore. Word spread faster than the fog drifting over the water. I walked down toward the shoreline as cold wind pushed across the marina docks, rattling loose ropes against aluminum posts with hollow metallic knocks. The whole structure looked different in daylight now. Less impressive, more temporary, like something built too fast by people hoping nobody would inspect it closely. Victoria was already there arguing with a county investigator beside the main dock entrance when I arrived. Her voice carried sharply across the water. This is a private community matter, she snapped. You do not just storm onto active development property because of rumors. The investigator, a gray-haired woman named Denise Keller, did not even react emotionally. She simply held up a folder thick with documents and said, Mrs. Hargrove, your project is currently operating under disputed ownership claims involving regulated water infrastructure. That sentence hit the crowd gathering nearby harder than any yelling could have. Residents started whispering immediately. One man quietly walked his wife back toward their truck the second he heard the phrase regulated water infrastructure. Liability fear had officially become public now. Victoria saw me standing near the old fishing dock and pointed directly at me in frustration. This is what he wanted, she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. He has manipulated this entire neighborhood against the board. I kept my voice calm. I asked for my property not to be developed without permission. The sheriff stepped between us slightly then, not aggressively, just enough to lower the temperature before Victoria embarrassed herself further. That alone shifted the power dynamic publicly. 2 days ago, security guards blocked me from my own shoreline. Now county officials were quietly containing her. Denise Keller opened her folder and began photographing shoreline markers while another investigator inspected the floating docks. Residents followed them from a distance like tourists watching a public disaster unfold in slow motion. Every new clipboard note made the neighborhood quieter. Then came the moment that completely shattered whatever authority Victoria still had left. Greg Walters walked out of the clubhouse carrying another box of internal HOA files and handed them directly to the investigators in front of everyone. Nobody spoke. Even the lake seemed still for a second except for rainwater dripping off the cedar railings. Victoria stared at Greg like she genuinely could not believe he had done it publicly. You are making a catastrophic mistake, she whispered to him. Greg looked exhausted. No, he replied softly. I already made it. Then Denise Keller turned toward the crowd and announced that all marina activity was suspended pending emergency legal and environmental review. A resident near the back actually muttered, Jesus Christ, under his breath while several others immediately started pulling HOA signs out of their truck beds before anyone could photograph them still supporting the project. 3 weeks later, the marina was already being dismantled piece by piece under gray morning skies, while fog drifted low across the lake like the water itself was finally exhaling. The county suspended every active permit tied to the project after investigators confirmed the shoreline surveys had been altered and multiple disclosures withheld from the lender during financing review. The bank froze the remaining construction funds within 48 hours of the suspension notice, and once that happened, the entire HOA board turned on each other almost overnight. Residents who used to applaud Victoria at meetings suddenly acted like they barely knew her. Her resignation letter spread through the neighborhood faster than any official announcement ever had. Nobody printed it. Nobody framed it. People just quietly forwarded screenshots to each other like evidence from a disaster everybody wanted distance from. I watched most of it from my dock in silence, while crews removed floating sections of the marina one muddy piece at a time. Wet cedar boards groaned against the cranes as workers loaded them onto flatbed trucks before sunrise each morning. The giant HOA banners disappeared first, then the decorative lanterns, then the wedding platform Victoria had bragged about during the first meeting. By the final week, only tire tracks, torn mud, and damaged shoreline grass remained where the marina used to float. The strangest part was how quiet the neighborhood became afterward. No more board meetings. No more aggressive emails taped to doors. Even the security guards stopped patrolling near my property. One morning I walked down to the east gate and found the HOA chains removed completely. Nobody announced it. Somebody had simply unlocked the gate during the night and left it open. I stood there for a long time listening to cold wind move across the water while rain tapped softly against the old metal roof of my father's storage shed behind me. That gate had been locked against my family less than a month earlier. Now it swung open freely beside the shoreline my grandfather built with his own hands. A few residents eventually came by privately to apologize. Frank Delaney brought coffee one morning and sat beside me on the dock without talking much at all. Linda Carver cried halfway through her apology because she admitted she ignored warning signs simply because Victoria always sounded confident. Even Greg Walters looked 20 years older when he stopped by to tell me the lender was considering civil action against several former board members individually. But Victoria disappeared almost completely after resigning. The last time anyone saw her in the neighborhood, she was loading boxes into the back of her white Range Rover during heavy rain, while people watched quietly from their porches without offering help. No screaming, no confrontation, just silence. The kind of silence that follows public humiliation after everyone finally understands who caused the damage. Looking back now, the marina was never really about lake access. It was about control. Victoria believed polished confidence and HOA authority could overpower ownership, history, and truth if she moved fast enough and pressured enough people into compliance. But greed always gets sloppy eventually. Somebody lies to a bank. Somebody alters paperwork. Somebody pushes construction before legal review finishes. And once fear enters wealthy communities, loyalty disappears faster than fog over warm water. The real lesson from all this is simple. Never surrender your rights just because somebody speaks confidently in a meeting room or waves around legal language they barely understand themselves. Stay calm. Document everything. Understand your property better than the people trying to take it from you. Because sometimes the people acting the most powerful are standing on the weakest foundation in the entire story. A month after the suspension, county crews officially restored the original shoreline markers along the western edge of the lake, while I stood beside the old fishing bench my grandfather built decades ago. The fog rolled low across the water again that morning, but this time the lake felt peaceful instead of tense. No generators. No floating lights. No champagne ceremonies. Just cold morning air, quiet water, and the sound of distant birds moving through cedar trees along the shoreline. I finally sat down on my dock with a fresh cup of coffee and watched sunrise reflect across water that belonged exactly where it always had. But right before I headed back toward the cabin, I noticed something that made me stop for a second. Another black SUV from the county had pulled slowly into the old marina parking area near the clubhouse. Two investigators stepped out carrying more file boxes toward the administration office, which meant whatever happened to Victoria Hargrove publicly might not be the end of what was still coming privately. Rank the story from 10 to 0. I would love to know what you think.